little bit more on this video series by Bass FZZ, ZZ if you're in the US. I think he has another channel by the name of Xerxes, so I want to be a little more respectful to him than I was in my last video, and I was kind of butchering his username. The series of videos that he's watching by a lot of mostly females who are talking about these three young guys who made the video where they talked about what men or what boys find attractive in girls, what they look for, qualities. And you know, they made a bit of an error in back to my old haunt. They made a bit of an error sort of with the title of their video, sort of saying that they could speak for all boys or men. And you know, it would be reasonable to point that out, I'm sure. And a lot of the girls, and I think a couple of the guys, referenced slut shaming. And Xerxes, or Bass FZZ, ZZ, sort of cringed every time he heard the term slut shaming. And he said, you know, I hate that term, I hate that term. Progressively, he got a little bit more and more disturbed by the term. And I actually agree with him. You know, it seems to me, when it comes to the idea of slut shaming, there's a difference between shaming someone for being promiscuous, man or woman, and expressing a preference for what you would like in a mate, sexual partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. There's a big difference there. When it comes to shaming someone publicly or something like that, or discriminating against someone because they happen to be promiscuous, that's obviously a problem. And I would call that slut shaming. It's hard for me to tell even sometimes when feminists talk about slut shaming, because they have things like slut walk. So I think feminists have to be okay with the term slut, or just that it refers to a female who is promiscuous, and that they're okay with that activity. That's what I'm assuming. Sometimes hard to tell, though. And so really what their beef is slut shaming, and I would share in that beef. I don't think that anybody should be shamed for being promiscuous. However, again, having said that, you can't tell someone that what they can have as qualities that they seek in a mate. It almost seems like this is an attempt to rob these guys of their agency, which is really what I was referring to in my previous video, that in the mating scene in our culture, at least right now, the agency is really, you know, held quite a bit by the woman, at the very least when it comes to marriage. You know, the men propose and the women decide, or the women choose in general. Not something that I particularly think needs to stick around, or something I'm particularly fond of. I think a lot of culture could die in a pool of fire, but that's sort of the way it is, and I think it would be healthy to point that out. But to tell someone that they can't seek a mate that is chaste, or whatever you want to call it, and that somehow degrades women because that's that person's particular preferences, I think is way off the mark. And oddly enough, in a lot of these videos, the very same women who are saying this then list out their preferences, right? Which is, you know, like anybody who would make a video like this, I'm not interested in. Well, that's a fucking preference. That's a standard that you have. Good for you. And, you know, it should be said, of course, that these men are just as subject to the results of their own choices as anybody else. So it could very well be that they'll never find a woman who meets their standards or characteristics that they desire, and they'll be alone. That's how the game is played. That's the luck of the draw. But to try to strip someone of their agency, that's something I've actually seen mostly done by social justice warriors. Now, before I go any further, I want to be careful to make a distinction between the pejorative, which typically used as a pejorative term, social justice warrior, and an actual person who campaigns for and fights, you know, against social injustice, right? There's a big difference between someone who campaigns and fights for the rights of women in other countries to, say, be able to have an education, be able to drive a car, not be under the thumb of a man, to maybe not be stoned to death for having been a victim of rape. Those people aren't social justice warriors. They're fucking heroes. The social justice warrior pejorative, as it's used as a pejorative, is more aptly used to describe someone like a a woman who's at some sort of a demonstration and is yelling as loud as she can to make sure everyone can hear, "Get your hand off my breast," when the videotape clearly shows that the man is not groping her in any way, shape, or form, and then actually initiates violence by pushing him off of some sort of ledge to his injury. And I would lump anyone who is attempting to rob someone else of their agency while they're purporting to be attempting to, give someone else theirs, right? These are people deserving of a pejorative term. And those seem to be the people that, in very much the same way, they'll talk about how you can't discriminate against someone just because of their race, their gender, their sexual preference. And then they'll talk about the nature of whiteness, or teach boys not to rape, as though it's okay to suddenly just classify all of one gender as a certain thing, even though that's what you claim to be fighting against. You know, when it comes to the whole idea of slut shaming, again, personal preference, you can't dictate that. And that guy's going to be subject to the results of that anyway. He's going to live with the consequences, be they positive or negative or neutral, of that choice. And that choice may change. You know, that's the thing. With men and boys, sometimes, and I mean anybody, sometimes it's about sexual competition, right? So when I was much younger, I definitely did not want an unchaste woman. It bothered me. In fact, I would be very upset if I was dating someone and I found out that she'd been promiscuous in her past. It bothered me quite a bit. Now, however, I actually prefer a woman who, maybe it's not so much the promiscuity, although that doesn't bother me anymore, as long as she's, safe and honors herself the whole time. But I really enjoy the notion of a woman who has sexual desire and knows what she wants and is willing to go after it and makes sure that she gets herself, what she needs in that department. That, to me, that's a big turn on. It wasn't always that way. That may change with these guys as well. And I think in some ways that's what people mean by this whole notion of, they want a saint in the boardroom and a slut in the bedroom. I mean, I think in some ways that's a mixing of those two lines. It's someone saying, listen, I don't want a woman who's promiscuous and outwardly sexual with everybody, but I want her to be very sexual with me. And there are many men, I'm sure, who live with a woman who is not all that sexually active. And I've actually seen quite a few women who are very upset with their husbands in that department as well, who definitely would be open to the idea of their partner being more sexually interested and or having had a more sexually active past, because that's what that means, is that they're potentially, unless it's because of dysfunction, interested in sex and like it and want to, And it's also ridiculous too, again, the double standard continues, because I hear always talking about slut shaming, but I don't hear anybody talking about playa shaming. There are a lot of guys who are very promiscuous. You might call them players. I'm not talking about necessarily manipulative guys. I'm not talking about Roofalin or these, I can't remember what they're called now, pickup artists. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about guys who are players, guys who like to date lots of women and have sex with lots of women, who are even open about it. There are plenty of women who do not want to have a man like that as their lifelong mate, that they don't want to consider him as a serious boyfriend, fiance, or husband. So, we don't talk about that at all. And the one thing I've never heard is I've never heard the term playa shaming. If you want to talk about sexism, that's certainly something that is shamed. It's shamed by most feminists and lots of other people. And it is a particular preference standard that a lot of women hold as well. So anyway, I just wanted to share that. I really agree with Xerxes, or Bass FZZZZ. This term slut shaming is really, I've had enough of it, because it's not very clearly defined. And it's not slut shaming if you say to yourself, I'm not really attracted to a woman who's promiscuous. I want a woman who is, who's a little more discerning in that department. And I'm not even one who shares in that characteristic, that desire anymore. I once was. But, you know, slut shaming should be reserved for when it is really what the term says. Shaming women for being promiscuous. I agree, that's bullshit. I think it's bullshit if we shame men for being promiscuous as well. I think what we need to do probably is it's reasonable to have a public discourse about some of the ramifications of promiscuity, and not just in terms of potential for pregnancy and sexual disease, but also the ramifications on your potential for seeking a lifelong partner, that a long-term promiscuous period of your life may actually cause you to miss opportunities and that sort of thing. That's all great, but no to slut shaming. Okay, thanks for watching.